states a clear intent to strike the nation coinciding with the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Such reductions would be unconscionable. So I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I reserve my time.
His time has expired.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last words.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to express my support, Mr. Chairman, for the intent of my colleague from New York in calling attention to the major deficiency in this bill. But Mr. Chairman, I feel compelled also to express my extreme disappointment at what's just occurred on this floor. Our colleague was on her feet ready to offer her amendment. She was on her feet ready to offer this amendment. Somebody may have thought that she was a couple of seconds late in doing that, but even if that were true, can't we? No, I will not. Can't we expect the basic comedy that a colleague who's been waiting here for an hour to offer this amendment has been waiting in turn, that we would have the basic comedy to allow her to offer that amendment? I just can't believe what we've just witnessed.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll be happy to yield.
I was just going to tell you we're trying to work something out on this, so if you would just give us just a minute, we're trying to see if we can work something out. So.
Well, I certainly hope so. So yeah. That's good, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to hear that. Let me go ahead, Mr. Chairman, and say something about my colleague's intent, because there is a major deficiency in this bill, and we need to address this, although it's extremely hard to address without the presence of viable offsets. State and local grants in this legislation are 55% below the enacted 2011 level. They are 70% below the enacted 2010 level. Moreover, these state and local grants are block granted. Individual programs such as state grants and urban area grants and port grants and transit and rail grants could be cut even farther because at the Secretary's discretion, she is going to have to choose within this block grant as to what kind of money goes to individual programs. At the full committee markup of this bill, Congressman Latourette and I offered a very similar amendment to what Ms. Lowy has put forward to restore funding to these programs. Now, we're not talking about lavish funding here. By no means would the funding be lavish. In fact, they would simply be equal to the already reduced fiscal year 2011 levels. But we, unfortunately, were not allowed to move forward with the offset that I've earlier discussed, having to do with the mislabeling, we believe, of emergency funds. So in any case, we're faced with the threat of terrorism looming larger and massive cuts to first responders and state and local preparedness. We're ignoring key investments in this bill that would make our communities safer. Local governments are our first responders to terrorist attacks, to natural disasters, to other emergencies. Local law enforcement, fire, emergency medical, as well as county public health and other public safety personnel are responsible for on-the-ground response and recovery action. Local communities, in addition, own, operate, and secure essential aspects of our nation's infrastructure, such as our ports, transit systems, water supplies, and schools and hospitals. So plainly put, Mr. Chairman, these cuts are short-sighted. I'm very, very pleased that our subcommittee colleague, Ms. Lowy, has made such persistent efforts to correct this bill's deficiencies and to keep faith with the parts of our country that we know are in the greatest peril. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks time?
What do you want me to do? Do it again?
No. We don't have anything. So.
What?
Yes, we don't have anything for you.
I can do it again.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5 minutes.
We're trying to work out an agreement with the gentlelady from New York, so if you would give us just a minute to work this out, we'll try to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. You have been very, very helpful. Thank you. So what are we doing? Why don't you get back to everything?
point you restate everything all over again, but you just say these points. Okay, can you go take a look? Okay. All right. Yeah, I was trying to figure it out. All right, so I asked for the answer, you said we have a time. That's fine. Okay.
Ms. Long, why don't you just continue to consider it out?
Consider your amendment out of order.
And do it again?
You've already given, I've already given my statement.
I'd ask unanimous consent to...
Does the gentleman from Alabama yield back?
Oh, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from New York.
I ask unanimous consent to consider my amendment out of order.
Is
Mr.
there
Chairman?
objection?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Alabama.
no objection.
There's no objection heard. The amendment will be considered at this point.
Thank you.
The clerk
I'd like
will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mrs.
I
Lowy
ask
of New
unanimous
York.
consent to waive the
Mr.
reading.
Is there
Chairman.
objection? Seeing none.
Mr.
the
Chairman.
amendment- Gentleman from
I
Alabama.
reserve a point of order for the gentlelady's amendment.
Point of order is reserved. Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to make a few additional points because previously I did discuss the amendment in greater detail, and I thank the chairman for your consideration. A couple of important things. The $1 billion for the block grant funding, I think it's important that we look at the breakdown. $192.6 million for law enforcement training and exercises, $55 million for Operation Stone Garden grants, which is overtime costs, $85 million for FEMA to administer the grant programs, which is the Department of Homeland Security estimate. And this brings the funding total down to $667.1 million before the block grant even begins to be distributed to the State Homeland Security Grant Program, UASI, Metropolitan Medical Response System, interoperability, port security, transit security, and citizen corps. SHISHGAP is written in such a way that it doesn't have to be even funded. But if it is, there are minimum funding requirements for each state and territory. 0.35% of total funds for FY12. Given that SHISHGAP provides funding to each state, there is no scenario under which the Secretary does not fund this program. That is mandatory. So the minimum funding level that can be provided for SHISHGAP and comply with the statutory requirement is $125.4 million. And this would leave just $551.7 million remaining for UASI, MMRS, interoperability, port security, transit security, citizen corps. Now, I discussed previously when I introduced my amendment that there are tremendous needs for responding to the recent disasters all around this country that are really unheard of. The tornadoes, the floods, the loss of life. People have to rebuild their homes, rebuild their lives. It's essential that we appropriate that additional money, but it's also essential that we respond to the threats which are still out there. Now, people will say bin Laden is gone, but there's an entire network that we have to be concerned about. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope that we can respond adequately to both disaster needs and the needs that our UASI areas need for our terrorist response for the grants. Is that it? Are you signaling something to me? I'm getting coaching from so many places around here. Let me conclude by thanking you for allowing me, after sitting here for 6 hours, maybe 8 hours today, to offer this amendment after being late for 10 seconds. But I appreciate your consideration. I appreciate the support. And I do hope we can pass it and respond to the real needs out there for both disasters and the terrorism threats that are with our communities. Thank you, and I yield back.
Does the gentleman still insist on his point of order?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment proposes to amend portions of the bill not yet read. Section 17, Chapter 2 of the House Practice Book states in part, it is not in order to strike or otherwise amend portions of a bill not yet read for amendment. I ask for a ruling from the Chair.
Chair is prepared to rule. To be considered en bloc pursuant to Clause 2F of Rule 21, an amendment must propose only to transfer appropriations among objects in the bill. Because the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from New York proposes only to increase certain accounts in the bill, it may not avail itself of Clause 2F to address portions of the bill not read. The point of order is sustained. Purposes, the gentlelady from California seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. It's the Richardson Amendment number 4.
The reading has not yet progressed to that point. The clerk will read.
Page 51, line 6, Emergency Management Performance Grants, $350 million. Radiological Emergency Preparedness Program, aggregate charges shall not be less than 100% of the amounts anticipated by the Department for its Radiological Emergency Preparedness Program for the next fiscal year. United States Fire Administration, $42,538,000. Disaster relief, including transfer of funds, $2,650,000,000.
Gentlelady from California. Is the gentlelady from California offering an amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this.
The gentlelady will suspend. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Richardson of California. Page 53, line 5, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $100 million, increased by $100 million.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak on this disaster relief funding. My amendment is designed to support response, rescue, and recovery. In fiscal year 2011, the Disaster Relief Fund was funded at $2.65 billion. I was pleased to see, only finally after great embarrassment, that we restored the funding of what it was previously in full year 2011 after the disaster that we had in Joplin, Missouri. This amount of funding is not enough, and we should just be honest with the American public in terms of the budget of what the real costs are. Hurricane season has not started yet, but FEMA has already made 37 major disaster declarations, 7 emergency declarations, and 54 fire management assistant declarations already this year. Just over the last few days, 142 people were killed in Joplin, Missouri during the tornado that struck the city on May 22, 2011. This disaster is the highest recorded death toll from a tornado in U.S. history. The Joplin tornado destroyed an estimate of 2,500 homes and damaged 10,000 others. In May, flooding in Memphis, Tennessee devastated 1,300 homes and caused thousands to be displaced. In April, a powerful storm system spawned tornadoes across 7 southern states, resulting in over 300 deaths in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Arkansas, Virginia, and Kentucky. Without disaster relief funding, or not having a sufficient amount of it, many of these communities would not be safe. These funds are used to be able to rebuild lives and communities. The Disaster Relief Fund is managed through FEMA. We need to ensure that people who are in need of assistance are not waiting on Congress to debate, but in fact Congress is responding with the appropriate resources. This other approach is wrong. We should never hold relief funds hostage and allow citizens to suffer from a disaster while Congress debates. I think it's unconscionable that we would not immediately allow FEMA the ability to provide the assistance that is needed to help rebuild our communities. Now let me show you a more recent picture of what happened in Joplin. And you'll see in this picture that it appears a man is holding a child who doesn't even have socks and shoes. So when we talk about Whether it's ideologically we believe in cutting the budget, we need to make sure we're cutting in the right places and not in places like this. Since full year 1989, Congress has appropriated roughly $292 billion for disaster assistance in 35 appropriation bills, primarily as supplementals to significant catastrophes that have occurred. The mean annual range that we've had to do as a supplemental is anywhere between $8.3 billion and $13.3 billion. Today we are considering only $2.65 billion. Clearly, history tells us it's not enough, and the American public should not have to wait each time that we debate when we know that what we are looking at today is not enough. Mr. Chairman, I urge the committee chair and my colleagues to support the Richardson Amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. The gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Chairman, I accept the gentlelady's amendment. However, I must clarify that the base bill
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I must clarify that the base bill includes $2.65 billion and includes an additional $1 billion in supplemental funds, and that's a total of $1.8 billion above the request. And so I would like to point that out to the gentlelady, but we will accept her amendment.
Gentleman yields back his time. Is there anybody else wishing to be heard on this amendment? Seeing none, the questions on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment's adopted. Clerk will read.
Page 56, line 19, Disaster Assistance Direct Loan Program Account, $296,000 for the cost of direct loans. Flood Hazard Mapping and Risk Analysis Program, $102,712,000. National Flood Insurance Fund, $171 million shall remain available until September 30th, 2013, and shall be derived from offsetting collections for salaries and expenses. National Pre-Disaster Mitigation Fund, $40 million. Emergency Food and Shelter, $120 million. Title IV, Research and Development Training and Services, United States Citizenship Immigration Services, $132,361,000.
Gentleman from California, seek recognition.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I have a amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Honda of California, page 60, beginning on line 15, strike, and of which none of the funds may be used for grants for immigrant integration.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my colleagues on the other side. Mr. Speaker, our amendment is a straightforward amendment that would remove language in the bill that targets immigrant integration grants. What are immigrant integration grants and why are they important? Every year, immigrant integration grants provide funding to local churches, schools, and community centers across the nation, from Catholic Charities in Dallas to the Ukrainian Community Center of Washington State to West Georgia Technical College to prepare legal permanent residents for citizenship. Let me repeat, Mr. Speaker. These grants are for legal permanent residents or citizens in waiting, like many of our parents and grandparents who came to America not speaking a word of English or knowing the great history and civics of our country. Citizenship instruction through these grants must include U.S. history and government lessons and civics-focused English lessons. We often hear from the other side that immigrants coming to this country should learn English, and they should. These grants provide a way for immigrants to do exactly that. It is perhaps fortuitous, and that is spelled F-O-R-T-U-I-T-O-U-S, fortuitous, that we are debating this amendment as the 2011 Scripps National Spelling Bee begins its annual competition this week. As one goes on the list of the 275 young student spellers, it is worth noting that and pointing out that many of them have parents who are immigrants or are immigrants themselves. 8 of the past 12 champions of the Scripps National Spelling Bee were foreign-born or had parents who were foreign-born. Renowned linguist Ben Simmer points out the connection between immigrant families and the spelling bee in this week's NPR story. And on the topic, Mr. Zimmer says, tells NPR, these kids are spending sometimes a few hours a day going through word lists to learn the most difficult words in English. Very often, they are youngsters coming from immigrant families that really prize learning English as part of becoming assimilated into American culture. So, my hat's off to all these young spellers. Mr. Speaker, the immigrants who rely on integration grants are often the parents of these success stories. They are the mother at the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society in New York, or the father at the Lutheran Social Services of South Dakota, who after working 2 jobs in a day, still find the energy to make it to a night class where they can learn English and learn about our nation's history and government. The energy that drives these parents is the same energy that drove our immigrant parents and grandparents. The idea that their hard work will give their children a chance to a better life in America. And while English language learner population is often characterized as solely immigrant, the reality is that the native-born, U.S.-born English language learner population nearly doubled between the year 2000 and 2005 and is increasing at a higher rate than the immigrant population. Between 2010 and 2030, these first and second generation immigrants are projected to account for all growth in the U.S. labor force. Better preparing this workforce will unite and strengthen our country. The notion that we as a nation shouldn't fund programs like integration grants flies in the face of what our country is all about. These new Americans are not looking for an easy ride. They're simply looking for the chance to learn English, learn about the history of their new home, learn about the history of their adopted home, their choice of a new home, and integrate into the fabric of America. There should be a direct source of appropriations for immigrant integration grants, which this bill takes away. At the very least, there should not be restrictions on how USCIS can fund these important grants in this bill. So I ask my colleagues to support this straightforward amendment, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Does anybody seek time? Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the gentleman from California's views, and we accept this amendment. However, I would like to state for the record that the $132 million that appropriated funds provided in this bill would not fund immigrant integration grants. They are provided for verification programs, both E-Verify and SAVE, and these are critical programs to the fund. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from North Carolina.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise merely to express my support also for Mr. Honda's amendment. I think it is entirely appropriate to permit appropriated funds to be used for immigration integration, and that indeed has been our past practice. And I yield back.
Does anybody else seek time? Gentlelady from California.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I stand in strong support of this amendment, which strikes language prohibiting direct appropriations funding for immigration integration grants. Integrating immigrants into our society makes us a stronger nation and a more united nation. Having federal policies in place to quickly integrate new citizens into our national fabric is and should remain an important priority for our government. This should not be a solely Republican or Democratic priority. This is not a partisan issue. In fact, it has had strong support from leaders on both sides of the aisle. President George Bush created the Office of Citizenship during his presidency because he recognized the importance of helping new citizens embrace their new home. The Office of Citizenship plays a key role in immigration integration by leading initiatives to promote citizenship awareness, providing grants to national and community-based organizations that prepare immigrants for citizenship, preparing educational materials for citizens, and trying to expand integration and citizenship resources in communities. And President Obama has picked up the torch from his predecessor, committing direct appropriations to an integration grant program that helps green card holders, who are all legal immigrants, get ready to become active participants in our democracy. These grants help legal residents navigate through the naturalization process, teach them about our nation's histories and government, and teaches them English. And these programs benefit real people, immigrants who came to America for a better life. Immigrants like Phyllis, a 74-year-old grandmother who took a citizenship class in Maryland. Once a week for 8 weeks, she and her classmates, 20 of them, in fact, spent 2 hours learning the basics of American history and government and interview skills for a naturalization test. Phyllis moved to the U.S. from Sri Lanka to take care of her 3 grandsons. Being a citizen, knowing our laws and speaking English will help her ensure those young boys grow up to be strong Americans themselves. Immigrants who integrate into U.S. society go on to become informed voters, active community members, innovators, entrepreneurs, and future job creators. Whether they come on family or employment visas, through the asylum or refugee program, or through other smaller legal immigration programs, legal permanent residents come to this country with the dream of becoming U.S. citizens and coming and giving back to their adopted home. In the last 2 fiscal years, Congress has directly appropriated $11 million for integration grants, but this bill doesn't provide direct appropriations. Instead, it pulls the funds out of the examination fees account, and it goes a step further, expressly prohibiting direct funding for immigration integration grants. But I think we should provide direct appropriations for these grants because immigration assimilation should be a national priority. Both sides agree that legal immigrants that want to become part of society and learn our laws and our language should be able to become citizens. And that's exactly what these funds do. I urge all my colleagues to support this amendment to help our nation and all its citizens, no matter where they were born, so that we can boost human potential and make us a stronger nation. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Does anyone else seek recognition? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. The clerk will read.
Page 61, line 3, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center salaries and expenses, $238,957,000, which up to $48,978,000 shall remain available until September 30th, 2013 for materials and support costs of federal law enforcement basic training. Acquisitions, construction improvements, and related expenses, $35,456,000 made to remain available until September 30th, 2016. Science and Technology, Management and Administration, $140,565,000. Research, Development, Acquisition, and Operations, $398,213,000, of which $196,713,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2014, and of which $201,500,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2016 for operation and construction of laboratory facilities.
Does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, when we receive information about Section 514.
The reading has not progressed to that point yet.
I thank
the clerk will continue to read.
Page 64, line 7, Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, Management and Administration, $40 million. Research, Development, and Operations, $245,194,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2014. Systems Acquisition, $552 million to remain available until September 30th, 2014. Title V, General Provisions, including rescissions of funds. Section 501, no appropriation in this Act shall remain available beyond the current fiscal year unless expressly so provided herein. Section 502, subject to the requirements of this Act, unexpended balances may be transferred. Section 503, none of the funds shall be available through reprogramming that creates a new program, project, office, or activity. Section 504, the Working Capital Fund established pursuant to Section 403 of Public Law 103-356 shall continue operations as a permanent working capital fund for fiscal year 2012. Section 505, not to exceed 50% of unobligated balances remaining at the end of fiscal year 2012 for salaries and expenses shall remain available through September 30th, 2013. Section 506, funds for intelligence activities are deemed to be specifically authorized. Section 507, none of the funds made available by this Act may be used to make or award a grant allocation or to issue a letter of intent totaling in excess of $1 million. Section 508, no agency shall purchase any additional facilities for law enforcement training without the advance approval of the committees. Section 509, none of the funds made available may be used for any construction or project for which a prospectus otherwise required has not been approved. Section 510, Sections 520, 522, and 530 of the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Act 2008, Public Law 110-161, shall apply to funds made available in this Act. Section 511, none of the funds may be used in contravention of the provisions of the Buy American Act. Section 512, none of the funds may be used to alter the transmission to Congress of any report. Section 513, none of the funds may be used to amend the oath of allegiance required of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Section 514, none of the funds may be used.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas arise?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The chair is waiting for the amendment to arrive.
I did not.
In the meantime, the clerk will read the remainder of Section 514.
Section 514, none of the funds may be used to process a competition under Office of Management and Budget Circular A-76.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Mr. Sessions of Texas, strike Section 514.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. According to recent media reports, the Department of Homeland Security is the top civilian agency conducting insourcing, which is converting private contractor services to government employees. My amendment would strike Section 514 of this legislation, which, as drafted, would prevent any funds in this bill from being used to conduct public-private competitions or to direct A-76 conversions for any program, project, or activity within the Department of Homeland Security. The A-76 process has been in existence since 1966. The original intent was to require the government to use private sector services when obtaining goods or services and assist with services from within the government. I believe that the A-76 produces quality competition that leads to great service and more cost efficiency results for the taxpayer. The bottom line is, Madam Chairman, is that the government does not need to perform all the goods and services that might be in the yellow pages. That is for the private sector to do. A-76 competitions between the public and private sector brings the best value to the taxpayer. According to Americans for Tax Reform, the average cost of each new federal employee for salary, benefits, and pensions totals $4.27 million. Without competition, government-run monopolies of commercial activities duplicate and price out the private sector, resulting in inefficient expenditures of taxpayer money. The Heritage Foundation has reported that subjecting federal employee positions, which are commercial in nature, to a public-private cost comparison generate on average a 30% cost savings regardless of which sector wins the competition. Even a recent Office of Management budget study states that the act of public-private competition generates cost savings from 10 to 40% on average. During this time of stretched budgets and bloated federal spending, Congress should do all that they can do to find taxpayer savings and reduce the cost of services provided by the federal government. I urge all of my colleagues to support this common-sense taxpayer First Amendment and to ensure cost-saving competition is available through the Department of Homeland Security. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Under the 5-minute rule, the gentleman cannot reserve but must yield back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Madam Chairman, move to strike the last words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, this amendment, Mr. Sessions' amendment, frankly has been known to us only a short period of time, and we are not certain that all members who might have an interest in this have been alerted. I wonder if the gentleman would yield to a question or two on this. Mr. Sessions, would you be willing to yield?
I'm sorry, I did not hear the gentleman.
I'm asking if you would yield for a question on your amendment.
I would.
My recollection is that this amendment was placed in the bill some years ago when there was a dispute, an active dispute about contracting out some services at CIS. What is the? Could you tell us what precipitates your trying to remove this language now? As I understand it, your amendment would not require the contracting out, but it would simply remove the prohibition. Is that right?
That's correct. The gentleman is correct. Today there is it is prohibited that this may be allowed in favor of the government hiring services through a federal government employee. What drives me to once again come on the floor, as I've done for 15 years, is that I believe that there are inherently governmental functions that a government employee must perform. However, when there's something like changing oil for a fleet of trucks, mowing grass, coming in and cleaning a building, performing functions that can be done more efficiently. Perhaps it's with computers, perhaps it's with data systems, perhaps it's professional services that can be done better rather than flying employees in from the federal government, but when they can be more cost effective, then a process is gone through. This process is called the A76 process. Right. And it's where the local management would look at the functions up to and including loaded costs for what it takes to perform the duties that might be done. And generally speaking, there's a 30% cheaper value or cost to the government when it's done by an outside contractor as opposed to a federal government employee.
The gentleman will, reclaiming my time, I understand the operation of the A76 process, and I also understand that there are times when contracting out makes sense and other times when it does not. But given the fact that the gentleman is not mandating any particular approach to any particular jobs, but is simply removing a prohibition, leaving this essentially to the judgment of the department, I will not object to this. I do wish that there had been a better opportunity for members who had an interest in this, possibly had a stake in this, to be here and respond. But with the gentleman's explanation, I will not object.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. Clerk is recognized. The clerk will read.
Page 74, line 5, section 515. Within 45 days after the end of each month, the Chief Financial Officer shall submit to the committees a monthly budget that includes total obligations for each office. Section 516. Funds appropriated for or transferred to Transportation Security Administration that are recovered shall be available only for the procurement of explosives detection systems. Section 517, any funds appropriated to Coast Guard acquisition, construction, and improvements for fiscal years 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, and 2006 for the 110 to 123-foot patrol boat conversion that are recovered shall be available until expended for the Fast Response Cutter Program. Section 518, Section 532A of Public Law 109-295 is amended by striking 2010 and inserting 2012. Section 519, the functions of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center instructor staff shall be classified as inherently governmental. Section 520, none of the funds appropriated in this or any other act to the Office of the Secretary and Executive Management may be obligated for a grant or contract funded. Section 521, none of the funds provided shall be used to fund any position designated as a principal federal official or any event that is declared a major disaster or emergency. Section 522, none of the funds made available may be used to enforce Section 40251 of the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, Public Law 108-458, unless the Assistant Secretary reverses the determination that butane lighters are not a significant threat to civil aviation security. Section 523, none of the funds made available may be used to carry out Section 872 of the Homeland Security Act of 2002. Section 524, none of the funds made available may be used by the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services to grant an immigration benefit unless background checks have been received by United States Citizenship and Immigration Services and results do not preclude the granting of the benefit. Section 525, none of the funds made available may be used to destroy any horse or other equine that has become unfit for service unless the trainer is first given the option to take possession of the equine. Section 526, Section 831 is amended. Section 527, the Secretary shall require that all contracts that provide award fees link such fees to successful acquisition outcomes. Section 528, none of the funds made available may be expended for any new hires that are not verified through the E-Verify program. Section 529, none of the funds made available may be used to prevent an individual not in the business of importing a prescription drug from importing a prescription drug from Canada that complies with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Section 530, the Secretary shall notify the committees of any proposed transfers of funds available to any agency within the department. Section 531, none of the funds made available may be used for planning, testing, piloting, or developing a national identification card. Section 532, if the Assistant Secretary determines that an airport does not need to participate in the E-Verify program, the Assistant Secretary shall certify to the committees that no security risks will result from such non-participation. Section 533, 30 days after the date on which the President determines to declare a major disaster, the Administrator shall submit to the committees a report which shall summarize damage assessment information. Section 534, if the Secretary of Homeland Security determines that the National Bio and Agro-Defense Facility be located at a site other than Plum Island, New York, the Secretary shall ensure that the Administrator sells all real and related personal property. Section 535, any official that is required to report to the committees may not delegate such authority unless specifically authorized herein. Section 536, Section 550B of the Department is further amended by striking 2011 and inserting 2012. Section 537, none of the funds appropriated may be used to transfer, release, or assist in the transfer or extending immigration benefits to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or any other detainee. Section 538, None of the funds made available may be used for first-class travel by the employees of agencies funded by this Act. Section 539, none of the funds made available may be used to propose a disciplinary or adverse action to any employee who engages regularly with the public in the performance of official duties because that employee elects to utilize protective equipment or measures. Section 540, none of the funds made available may be used to employ workers described in Section 274A H3 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Section 541, any company that collects personal information from any individual in the Registered Traveler Program shall safeguard and dispose of such information. Section 542, none of the funds appropriated may be used to pay award or incentive fees for contractor performance that has been judged to be below satisfactory performance. Section 543, not later than 180 days after the date of the enactment of this Act, the Assistant Secretary shall submit to the committees a report that either 1, certifies that the requirement for screening all air cargo on passenger aircraft by the deadline has been met, or 2, includes a strategy to comply with the requirements. Section 544, in developing any process to screen aviation passengers and crews, the Secretary shall ensure that all such processes take into consideration such passengers and crews' privacy and civil liberties. Section 544. Section 544, in developing any process to screen aviation passengers and crews, the Secretary shall ensure that all processes take into consideration such passengers and crews' privacy and civil liberties. Mrs. Lummis has an amendment. Section 545, Sections 1309A and 1319 of the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968 shall be amended by striking September 30th, 2011 and inserting September 30th, 2012. Section 546, funds deposited into the Immigration Examinations Fee account, $8,500,000, is available to United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, providing an immigration integration grants program. Section 547, the Secretary may transfer to the Secretary of Interior amounts available for environmental mitigation requirements.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Wyoming rise?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Lummis of Wyoming, page 89, beginning at line 14, strike Section 547.
The gentlewoman from Wyoming is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My amendment would strike Section 547, which would devote border security dollars to environmental mitigation along this country's southern border. The Border Patrol has unlimited access to private property, but the Border Patrol cannot always patrol federal land, even if it is a known corridor for illegal traffic, including trafficking of humans and trafficking of drugs. Some permits, which are required to be issued by the Department of the Interior to the Department of Homeland Security for Border Patrol, take months to approve. Others are not granted at all. But when the Department of Homeland Security, our Border Patrol, is given access, federal land managers force the Border Patrol to fork over money for environmental projects that may or may not have anything to do with the constitutional obligations of our Border Patrol. Madam Chairman, these are American taxpayer dollars, and more than that, they're dollars for border security, which I again repeat is a constitutionally delineated function of the federal government. But under Section 547, these tax dollars are paying for the unreasonable demands placed on the Border Patrol by federal land managers. One department of the government, the Department of the Interior,
taking dollars from another, the Department of Homeland Security, for a function that is required in the Constitution by the Border Patrol. I appreciate the Chairman's staff taking time to try to work out this with my office and with the Natural Resources Committee, the standing committee that is responsible for supervisory control of the Department of the Interior. I regret that we were not able to come to resolution of this issue before floor consideration, so I'm moving to strike this provision with the hope that we can continue to work with Chairman Simpson, who is the subcommittee chairman of the Appropriations Committee on Interior and the Environment, and Chairman Hastings, who is the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee in the House, to come up with a better approach to solving this problem of Border Patrol access to federal lands. Madam Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Madam Chairman, I rise in opposition to this amendment and move to strike the last words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, the gentlewoman's agreement, the amendment, strikes language permitting the use of previously appropriated and specifically designated DHS funds for land acquisition along the southwest border for environmental mitigation. I feel I need to take a moment just to provide a bit of context. Since 2006, our subcommittee, which I chaired from 2007 to 2010, has increased funding for border security by over $2 billion annually. We invested well over $1 billion for fencing and other tactical infrastructure alone during this period. Now, responding to concerns about possible environmental problems associated with such a massive construction undertaking, much of which has taken place on environmentally sensitive lands, Congress provided modest amounts to mitigate these potential environmental consequences, $50 million in fiscal 09 and $40 million in fiscal 10. Some of this mitigation effort involves acquiring land from willing sellers for buffer zones to protect fragile habitats, principally along the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. Since the Department doesn't have the statutory authority to acquire land for the purpose of environmental mitigation, we came to an agreement among Democrats and Republicans last year in the context of negotiations over an Omnibus 2011 bill to grant the limited authority to transfer these specific funds to the Department of Interior for land acquisition. Obviously, Interior has the statutory authority to acquire land for this purpose. So let me, Madam Chairman, read the section of the Chairman's report so everyone knows how non-controversial this provision is that Mrs. Lummis seeks to strike. And I'm quoting, "In order for the Department to execute interdepartmental agreements with the U.S. Department of the Interior to complete environmental mitigation activities, the committee includes a general provision, Section 547 in the bill, permitting the transfer of previously appropriated environmental mitigation funds under BizFit to the U.S. Department of Interior to carry out this purpose. The authority is narrowly tailored and controlled to ensure that funds will only be transferred in accordance with a written agreement between the Secretaries of Homeland Security and Interior, where the Secretary of the Interior has submitted an expenditure plan 15 days in advance of the proposed transfer, detailing the actions proposed to be taken with amounts transferred, where the Secretary of Homeland Security has certified that the actions outlined in the expenditure plan cannot be legally executed under the authorities of CBP or any other component of the Department of Homeland Security, and the actions are determined to be necessary for the mitigation of construction, operation, and maintenance activities related to border security," end of quote. Madam Chairman, as a government, we have many responsibilities and priorities. These include, of course, securing our borders, something I've worked on a lot in these past 4 years. It also includes protecting our natural and cultural resources. The sort of interagency agreement that Homeland Security and Interior have entered into for environmental mitigation is exactly what we should be encouraging, especially because this arrangement is explicit that Interior cannot take any action that CBP does not first agree to. Let me repeat, Interior cannot take any action that CBP does not approve. So I urge my colleagues to honor this agreement, a reasonable arrangement, and defeat this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington, for what purpose do you rise?
Opposition to the amendment, and I move to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, I want to commend the gentleman from North Carolina for his work during the years when he was chairman of this committee, and also this year on this bill and this provision. I have been down to the border and have seen these very large fences that we have created there, which do have an adverse effect on some of the species in that area, who in the past would go back and forth from Texas or Arizona into Mexico and back. The Department of Interior could have raised objections to this project and required detailed environmental assessments and possibly could have brought actions under the Endangered Species Act. But because this was worked out between the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Interior, that was avoided so that we could go ahead and build the fences in a very timely way. So I think that taking this amendment out is a mistake. It is not considerate of the environment, which we should be trying to protect. And there are many problems down in the border because of these fences. So I urge that we defeat the Loomis amendment and go along with what the committee has artfully worked out. And it's a good compromise and should remain in the bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Madam Chair, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Most people are clearly not aware that national security on our borders is compromised on public lands by federal land managers who have the authority to deny the Border Patrol access to those federal lands. Most people are not aware that we put money into this budget thinking it is going for Homeland Security, only to see it mysteriously transferred over to another agency without Congress ever understanding or authorizing where that transfer is or what that transfer may be. It is estimated that we have had direct transfers of at least $9 million, although the numbers are not clear. If you add up what the Department of Homeland Security spends on their own part that is not a direct transfer, we may be in the neighborhood of $50 million that is spent on this particular program. This money can be used for land acquisition. If we really want land acquisition, we put this money in the Interior budget where it belongs, so we know what it is, we know why it is there, and we can track for what it is used. This becomes simply a secret slush fund from Homeland Security to Interior, and Congress has no idea or clue of how this money we are putting into Homeland Security's budget is being used. Let me give you a specific example. Border Patrol wanted to put surveillance towers on a strategic location on the Arizona border. Unfortunately, the land manager would not allow them in a particular area, so they had to be moved at least 4 miles away, creating specific blackout areas on that particular land situation, security gaps. It was a 4 miles of heavily trafficked area. Then, because there happened to be a bat in that area, of their own sources, Homeland Security still had to monitor the amount of bats who may accidentally fly into those towers for 5 years after the implementation of those towers were put in there, at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars to monitor and count bats. And if they came across a pronghorn antelope while they were doing it, Homeland Security had to back away without turning its back on the pronghorn at a speed no greater than 15 miles an hour until it was a certain distance away from that situation. Like, we've already been told of situations where mitigation funds have been spent on a species that has not existed in that area for the last decade. What we are trying to do is spend our money wisely. We need to curtail this practice until at least Congress has the ability of completely understanding where this mitigation money is going and can approve it ahead of time. Madam Chairman, Most of the environmental degradation that is taking place on our southern border, especially in the state of Arizona, is not being done by the Border Patrol. It's being done by illegal immigrants, the drug cartels, the human traffickers, potential terrorists who are coming in here with no design and no care about the ecology of the area or endangered species or anything else. If we truly want to improve the ecology and improve our environmental quality on that border, you put every dime you can into Border Patrol. You let the Border Patrol have the access that they need to do their jobs, because by stopping the illegal bad guys coming across is the only way we will ever have a true environmental solution on that particular border. So far, we do not know how this money is spent. It is wrong. This is indeed the right approach to take on this particular problem. I yield back, Madam Chairman.
The gentleman from...
If I have